everyone, and welcome to the 12th episode of the 122nd Football Podcast. Our guest for today is Matt Stigler from Pave. Matt Stigler is a strength and conditioning coach that coaches soccer athletes. So, Matt, thank you for being here today on the podcast. My question for you is generally, as an athlete, specifically for soccer, how would you train to become more agile, faster, and more explosive?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me on, man. I appreciate it. So the very first thing that I would do, and the thing that I see people get often most frequently, is they are doing these incredibly long sprints. And studies show that on average, the longest sprint that you're going to perform during a match is going to be somewhere around like 30 yards, 30 meters, somewhere in that range. So I often see these people that are doing 100-yard sprints, 70-yard sprints, and they do them for a ton of reps. And there's a few problems with this. One, we obviously don't see that happen very often during a match. It maybe happens to you once a match, probably a little bit closer to 0 times. But the other problem is people often think that, oh, those 70-yard sprints, those 100-yard sprints are more difficult than the 10-yard sprints or the 5-yard starts that we often do in my training programs. And to some extent, that's correct. The way that I do it with my athletes is those shorter sprints. We do more of them and we make them repeated, which is what you actually see during a match. But the other thing is when you are doing those long distance sprints and you're doing them with under severe levels of fatigue, your sprint mechanics often break down. And then you're getting hundreds of yards of bad technique sprints. And when you are doing that for such a long period of time, your technique breaks down. This is where we see things like injuries. This is where we see things like overtraining, all things that we are looking to avoid, whether we're in season or off season. So the first thing I would do is I would say, cut down your sprint distances a ton. The other thing that I would say is we have to talk about in-season versus off-season sprint training. So if we are looking at in-season training, because that's really where it becomes more difficult because you're playing more matches, we need to keep you fresh and at a high level. The things we need to focus on, just like the last point, we need to keep them short because longer sprints are more fatiguing. There's nothing more stressful on the body than top speed sprinting. So ideally, I like to keep things really short during the season, like 10 to 15 yards, and repeating that is perfect. The other thing we can start to talk about is these things called soft starts. So when you're doing your sprint training, you have soft starts and hard starts. Hard starts are going to require more force output to get you going. So we tend to use soft starts in our programs because that is just a way for us to still get your sprint training in while still limiting the amount of fatigue that is placed on the body. So soft starts are things like a walking start. Soft starts are things like a split stance start and a light falling start. So a walking start is like, if I was going to have you run a 10-yard sprint, you'd walk up to the line, you'd take 3 steps, 1, 2, 3, and then you'd go into it. Split stance starts, you just have one foot in front of the other. Nice and simple, you just go. It's pretty natural for people. Falling starts, if I had you on the line, and it's almost like a forward trust fall, where just kind of lean you forward until you're at like that acceleration angle that we're looking at, that 45-degree angle, you push for it. Those things are a little bit easier on the body. So we like to find different ways in season that we can stress the body the proper amount. So that, again, we're not overtraining you. We're still getting physiological adaptations. You'll still get stronger, still get faster, but we're not going to have that same risk of injury.
Okay, just to recap what you said. So when it's not in season, even in season, one tip that you recommend is to make everything short so the fatigue on the body is less. Now, I have one question about that. Does that also include the fact that for short sprints, you use more your fast twitch muscles? And for longer sprints, do you like switch over to your slow twitch muscles, or like how does that work together?
So sprinting in general is going to be very biased towards the fast twitch muscle fibers. The only real difference is with the acceleration aspect of it, you're going to be using a little bit more force in the muscles. Those muscles are going to be working a little bit harder. And once you get going with it, it's a lot more of the actual rate in which everything is firing. So the speed is a lot faster. There's also nothing that the human body does that is faster than top speed sprinting. So we need that quick contract, relax. So they're both fast twitch muscle fibers. And, I like to really focus on, muscles obviously play a massive part in it, but I like to focus on the ability for the tendons and connective tissues to store and release energy quickly, because they often say that the best athletes are the ones that can actually relax the fastest. So when you see a really high level sprinter, you look at their face, none of them are straining a ton or anything like that. And that's on purpose. They want to stay relaxed from head to toe, because if I'm super tense, I can't release that energy. And then if I cannot absorb that energy, then I can't produce it as well either. So I like to think of the example. You ever got one of those bouncy balls that you like win from one of those little like vending machines, and you can just bounce it from like shoulder level and it's going to go super high? That is the perfect amount of force absorption and production. And that's the same thing we're looking for in your tendons. Whereas if you dropped like a brick from shoulder level, that's too much force production. There's not enough absorption. That thing would barely bounce an inch off the ground. Then you think of something like a cup of pudding. That has all force absorption, same thing. You drop it from here, that's going to splat right to the ground. So we got to look at, like you said, those fast twitch muscle fibers, but also we got to look at how the tendons can produce force as well.
Perfect. So it's like basically also a combination of like being light on your feet. Okay, I get that.
Yeah. So that's really important. Mm-hmm.
Which is kind of funny when you think about it, right? You want to sprint your hardest, but like you kind of like you don't have to try too hard so you don't get strained.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a weird thing, because we all think that more effort's the way to go, but when you find that perfect combination, that's where you see it. And that's why if you ever seen a power lifter run, their whole sport is force production. So while they're able to produce a lot of force, but they are not able to absorb it as well as like a Mbappe or something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Now more like towards how you plan those sessions. So like I have two main questions for you. During, let's say, the off season or even the preseason, how many sessions would you have focusing on what you talked about, and how long are those sessions usually?
Yeah. So, it depends a lot on the athlete and what their goals are in the season and in the off season. Like right now, I'm working with a lot of people that their goals are much more strength based, but that often pairs well with those short acceleration work. So the thing that I try and look for with off season training, if they are playing a decent amount, I don't want them to be running more than like 400 yards per session. And the other thing that I really look for is we have to look at, are we looking to work on power or capacity? So power is like, how fast can you run one single time? So like if you can run 20 miles per hour, and if we're working on power work, I'm going to get you to 21 miles per hour. Whereas capacity is like, if you can run 20 miles per hour, I want you to be able to run that in the first minute of the game, and I want you to be able to run that in the 90th minute of the game. So you have to look into that as well. There's a lot of different factors, but as a general rule, 400 yards per session, absolute max. And then I don't like to do max top speed sprinting 2 days in a row. So, that usually comes out to somewhere between 3-4 times a week max. It's usually closer to 3, especially with an athlete like a soccer player who plays a lot and is getting a lot of running. You really want to make sure that you don't overdo it, because there is so much conditioning in the game. But at the same time, what you often see in 11v11, these small-sided games, is you're running fast, but you're never really, I don't want to say never, but you're really rarely running at as fast as you absolutely can, because one, you're either on the ball, two, you're often making curved runs or something of that nature. There's so many different factors in the game that it really limits our ability to just be like, hey, just run straight and run as fast as we can. So I often like to work on that outside of the actual training sessions, because if we can get that max power, like I said, if we can get you from 20 to 21 miles per hour, even if you only have to run at 90% of your max speed, we're getting your 90% from, off the top of my head. If we got you at 20 miles per hour, you only run 19 miles per hour during the game because that's your 95%. Then we can get you running at 20, but it's less effort. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So it's not really your max speed, but you improve your like overall speed. So even if it's not your max speed, you still improve.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just because we don't see it on the pitch doesn't mean that it's something that we shouldn't train. Because again, you are running fast during the match. I mean, that's very obvious. So if we can get that ceiling higher, we're either going to make it so that you don't have to run as hard during the match, and then you're going to feel like, oh, I'm in better condition. That's why sometimes when I have athletes who become faster during their off-season training, they go into the season, they're like, oh, I feel like I'm in better shape. It's like, well, we didn't do too much conditioning. It's just the fact that you now don't have to work as hard to hit those same speeds that were necessary for the match.
Okay, that's good. I didn't think of it that way. So you said that like it gets very specific depending on the athlete.
Yeah.
But like a usual like general rule is like you'd like to do 3 or 4 sessions a week, just like so you don't get 2 sessions right after one another. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And because people usually in the off season, they have some technical stuff that they like to do. I usually lean towards, it's honestly almost like a 2.5 to like 3, because like what I like to start people with is 2 days of field work, conditioning, agility. And those are like just dedicated to the pitch and like working on field drills. And I like to have another day where it's either like it's like a gym session where it's like we do our weights and then we have our conditioning after, or we have like an actual gym conditioning session where like, hey, I'll have you do max sprints on a bike, which is also a fantastic option for in season as well, because it doesn't take the same pounding on the joints, but you can go absolute max output there. So usually 2.5 to 3 is great. If you aren't so worried about the technical side and you really, really want to work on your fitness, you could bump that up to 4 for sure.
Okay. What about if you want more like, how do I say, forced output and yeah, just like raw forced output? Would you recommend doing more gym work rather than less explosiveness work?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I really found useful was, you see these people again that are very strong that are also incredibly slow. So on a continuum of this is your max strength stuff is very slow. And then we have your top end sprinting over here. This still contributes to this, but we need to bridge the gap a little bit as well. So we have things like speed strength work where we are doing like squats with like 20 to 30% of your max weight, but you're moving it as fast as you can. We're doing things like weighted box jumps. We're doing things like sled pushes. And those are kind of the things that like, all right, that's on the middle there, where I always have people do max strength stuff because it does make you faster. But I think if you only do the max strength stuff, you're really not going to get faster. You need to do this because this will benefit this and this and this, and then we can get over to where it translates to that top end sprinting.
Okay. And what about in season? Do you do a lot of gym work too?
Yeah. It's so I work with a lot of youth athletes, which is one of my favorite things to do because you can have such a massive impact on those types of athletes just because you're not going to make Cristiano Ronaldo much more athletic. I mean that man's just he's a freak and you're not going to change him too much. Your goal is to not hurt him. But you get a high schooler and you can really, really mold them and make some progress. So yeah, I have them do a decent amount of gym work. especially because a lot of the times they don't have a lot of experience in the gym. So the amount of weight that they're moving isn't really enough to fatigue them too much. Then you have to consider the fact too that there's a lot of, you go on like TikTok and everything and you see these routines, and I always think about this when I'm posting mine, because I'll post something and put like 2 to 3 sets. I think I'm the only person I've ever seen do that, because every routine you see is like 5 sets of back squats, 5 sets of deadlifts, like 10 sets of box jumps. It's like, it's way too much. So if you can kind of like microdose these things and have like, I even program, I don't know if you've seen my video on doing the 1x20 method. Doing 1 set of 20 has actually been shown to have really positive benefits on in-season strength, because it's such a, it's like the perfect dosage to the point where it's going to get you stronger, even though it's in like the muscular endurance rep range, because you're practicing those reps neurologically. Your body's getting better at firing those patterns, and you're not overstressing the body during the season. So there's a lot of different ways that we can play around with it, where I do a lot of stuff with 2 sets. I do a lot of stuff with 1 set of high rep stuff. So there's absolutely different ways. And, you know, last thing I'll say about that is there's a lot of stuff that you can do in the gym that is not, you know, people think you go into the gym, you crush yourself and you leave. There's a lot of stuff that you can do that's more on the force absorption side of things that is really beneficial. So there's 2 types of isometrics. There's overcoming and then there's yielding. Overcoming isometric would be like if I try to like push into the wall as hard as I can for 5 seconds. A yielding isometric is if like I took a kettlebell and dropped down into the bottom of the squat and just let the kettlebell kind of sink with me, and I just held that bottom position for a while. The yielding isometrics are really beneficial for people in season because it teaches force absorption. It's not incredibly stressful on the body. That's the type of stuff that's really going to get your mobility good. This passive static stretching, that's really, studies have shown that that's very short-term benefits to that type of stuff. So you actually get some load, you do some yielding isometrics, you do some types of light eccentric work at quick rates. Like I just posted a video the other day about drop split squats. It's not a lot of pounding on the joints. It teaches a quick force absorption to a quick relaxation and stick. Those are the types of things that you can do in the gym that aren't going to overly stress you and allow you to still make progress.
Okay. When we're talking about all of this, let's say we have an athlete, right? That let's say he does everything perfect. He has all the right sets, reps. He has a perfect training for every exercise, and he has the right isometrics and eccentrics positions, whatever you talked about.